Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
What if the version of yourself you think is you is actually just a story, a false narrative woven from your past traumas, fears, and societal pressures? And what if freeing yourself from this story could unlock a life of true authenticity, joy, and freedom? Today, I'm thrilled to bring you Bryan Hubbard, a visionary thinker and the creator of Time-Light Therapy. Bryan is also the author of two groundbreaking books, The Untrue Story of You and Time-Light: How to Let Go of Your Past, Be Your True Self, and Become Who You Were Always Meant to Be. Bryan's deeply personal journey began with his battle against chronic depression, a struggle that led him to a profound realization. Depression wasn't something external. It was intricately tied to his very being. This revelation inspired him to create Time-Light Therapy, a revolutionary model that challenges how we view time, self, and healing. In this episode, we dive into the core concepts of being time-light versus time-heavy, exploring how we carry the weight of our past into the present and how to liberate ourselves from it. We'll also talk about practical tools for rewriting the false narratives that keep us stuck, discuss how childhood traumas shape our adult selves, and explore the interplay between the past, present, and future. Bryan offers a unique blend of philosophical depth and actionable insight, guiding us toward inner freedom and fulfillment. Oh, Bryan, what a delight. Welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. It is so good to be with you.
Likewise, Ariana, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. I was very excited for this conversation. Who you are in your life's work touches upon some things that I myself am intimately not only aware of, but have experience with. And I know you're doing so much good in the world. You've actually had an incredible journey from dealing with chronic depression. And from this, you actually developed your groundbreaking Time-Light Therapy. And you're now a prominent author, a philosopher. You're very well known for not only this intellectual journey that you had, but this deeply personal journey that you also shared, rooted in your own profound struggles and also the revelations you garnered from these struggles. I would love, Bryan, if you could share more about yourself and also about the pivotal moment when you realized that your depression was not separate from you, but actually a part of you, and how this realization actually was the seed from which everything else grew.
Sure. Oh, yeah, happy to. So I suppose better start at the beginning. And that was within 2 years of my birth, I was being psychologically abused by my father, in as much as he stopped talking to me. And his only means of communication was whistling. So he wouldn't acknowledge me, call me by my name, or even treat me as a human being. And so instead, he whistled at me for about 6, 7 years when finally my mother felt it was time that behavior should stop, which eventually it did. It left obviously a very deep scar. And by the time I was a young adult, I really was not functioning. And I was quite incapable of really leading a normal adult life, in as much as I was my own worst enemy. I never felt that I was good enough for anything. It was really hard for me to apply for jobs. And I'll tell you, I even felt I couldn't buy clothes because I didn't think I was really worthy to own nice clothes. And that was living a semi-life from being a young adult. And two people saved my life, and they're both women. The first was my mother. And without my mother, I don't think I'd be here today, actually. And her love for me and my love for her, we clung to the wreckage and survived, because he was wretched to my mother as well. He's just a deeply angry man. And I could go into details because I discovered lots of things, and I can talk about that in a moment, but that's a slight side issue. And the second woman who saved my life was my wife, Lynn McTaggart, my second wife, Lynn McTaggart, who many of you already know, famous for the intentional experiment and Power of Eight and what have you. And That's when I first discovered a proper adult relationship where both parties can grow and help each other grow. And that was really important to me. Nonetheless, I crashed into chronic depression and even felt suicidal on occasions. And I thought this was just madness because I had so many things going for me in my life, not least of which was Lynn, two wonderful children, a successful publishing company, but I just couldn't connect with it. It didn't mean that much to me. And I couldn't figure out why, because you look at the outside and you say, why would this man ever be depressed? He's got no reason to be. But I was, and several clues happened to me along the way. And one was the death of my own father. And he was a man of 90 at the time, very healthy. And he'd had a medical checkup and they said his heart was in great shape and he was, physically in fantastic shape. I guess that's the key to good health, is to vent your spleen and be angry. I don't know, but he was in great shape. But the day I went to see him, there he was in bed. And he actually said, I've just had enough. And I said, what do you mean enough of life? Essentially, he said, just had enough. And I didn't take it very seriously. And yet 3 days later, the phone goes and there's my mother saying, Dad has died. And it really felt, wow, he really did have enough. And I think it's actually not that uncommon. Old people die from no cause at all, other than having had enough. It doesn't get on the death certificate, but I did feel that it really, and that was something that it was a seed moment for me, but nothing came of that. And then a couple of years after that, I was at home on my own. I picked up this book on Lynn's shelves because she's got stacks of research books for her own work. And this particular book was written by a Canadian academic called Ian Stevenson. And it was actually about ghosts. Now, Stevenson was a very brave academic because to even research subjects like that, when you are dependent upon funding and retaining your chair, you don't do stuff like that. But he did. And I think that was remarkably brave. And he was determined because he was a scientist. He wanted to actually find stuff out, go where the truth leads. And the stories were interesting. In most cases, people didn't actually want to talk to him. They were either so embarrassed or just thought, this is so weird, I don't want to talk to you. But he explained it's in the name of science, so they did. And it was almost in every case, it was stories about incomplete business. And it was the ghost returned to say something like, the real will's in the bottom drawer in the hidden cabinet, which you don't know. And they'd find the hidden cabinet and there indeed was the will, or whatever it was. There was loads of stories about incomplete business. And when the business was complete, the ghost went. And whether or not you believe in ghosts, it's a really strong metaphor for life. Mm. And I put the book down and just within moments, this statement crashed into my head. And it was this, which is, that to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. The hell does that mean? And I didn't really know, but even this was some years ago. And even today, I still go back to that and unpick a bit more of it because it actually is incredibly profound. And I discovered loads more about that. And then this sort of transmission spoke something about three bodies, and then it was gone. And if people believe in divine inspiration, yeah, but you still got to do a lot of work. And I spent some years after that really understanding that and testing it in workshops before I think I finally understood what it all meant. And it was very profound. And there are a number of things that led off from that statement. It was the beginning of the end of the depression for me. And I've lived ever since a truly joyful life. But I came to understand the significance of trauma and the legacy that it leaves us all with. And depression is one of those legacies. And if you were to keep rattling off, you would ask questions at this point. But I suppose the single most significant discovery was that time is not a dimension, it's an energy. Yeah. And that it is released at the moment of trauma. Now, that goes much deeper than that, because that energy creates a you that has problem. There is no difference at all between, for example, depression and you. The depression has created a self that owns the depression, which sounds a bit weird, but I think it's one of the fundamental errors of the Western mind is in believing that there is a central individual person who then has issues.
Yes.
I think it's the other way around. The issues create the person.
Mm.
And it's only when you understand that profound change can be possible, because your relationship to the problem changes from trying to fix the problem to actually changing your relationship to time. And when you can see that and do that, it's transformative. And so that, I suppose, is one of the many keys to time light. It's one of the central keys. And and I think the problem we all face is that here's me who has A, B, C, and D. And the only problem with that picture is there's no me. It's just A, B, C, and D. And that is a very important insight, because then true transformation is possible. Because when I was depressed, I tried various things and they're all helpful. I'm not knocking anything out there. Whatever helps you, great, do it. But for me, it helped, but it was not a profound change. And often within a few weeks, I'll go back into the old ways again, or whatever it might be. It didn't give me the profound insight which allowed me to make that change. That was my insight from all of that, and I think there are loads of things that lead off of that, which you can talk about next, if you like.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing your personal story, Bryan. I think it's so important to, obviously it's up to the individual, but such as you have done also in your books, to open up about our personal story and being vulnerable and just being authentic. And it's appealing to even just witness that. Now you actually develop concepts and systems, protocols that support people on their healing journey. And what you just alluded to, what really fascinated me, Bryan, was your concept of time heavy versus time light.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not just a metaphor as I understood it, but it's a profound rethinking of how we carry our past into our present. It's a philosophical and a psychological model, and it very much challenges conventional views of time and self, as you also just stated. Can you explain how this concept evolved, and what does it actually mean for someone to transition from time heavy to time light?
Okay. My dad was time heavy. When he died, he was really time heavy. He'd had a whole cartload of experiences which dragged him down. Just a little bit of metaphysics. I don't want to go into it too much because it's a slight red herring, but time itself, as we understand it, doesn't exist. And as I said, I don't want to go on about that too much because it doesn't matter if you think it does or it doesn't. Time, as we understand it, merely measures change, but it doesn't. We count time by calendars and watches, but actually that's all it's doing. It's recording change. But in terms of a dimension, it just isn't there. So the only time that exists for human beings is this psychological time, which gets, as I say, created at the moment of trauma. And we can talk about that in a moment. But I don't like to use the word trauma because it's quite a medical term. And I think people think they know what trauma is. And they usually think it's something to do with war zones and people going through terrible things. I'll explain to you that's not quite right, but I don't use that term. I use a term called the time-heavy experience. So when we are born, there is no division between us and the world. You don't remember this, but I do observe it in my grandchild, which is delightful to see, that she cannot differentiate between herself and her parents or the world. And to her, there is hardly any difference. And it's only with experience that she starts to see a difference. And the first difference is that she has a name and that somehow she's different from the world because it doesn't always behave in the way she wants it to. And these are the seed moments of psychological time. Until we get to the point, round about the age of 3 or 4, when I am most definitely a subject, which makes everything else an object. Where before everything is subjective, the whole world is subjective, which actually is our natural state. That is correct. But we lose that and we create a division between me and you or the world. And so subject, object arise. At that point, experience becomes not only possible, but experience begins to be magnified by prior experience. Now, when we are at one with the world, if you like, I should just talk about the time centers for a moment. There is present time. Now, present time actually encompasses everything that we can see, touch, hear, and understand, which includes the whole universe. And I suppose you could argue that's consciousness is, but consciousness has another element to it. But so present time, you are within it, your brain is within it. The brain does not create consciousness. It is a receiver of consciousness. So there we are. There's you within present time, which is everything that you can imagine, see, and all the rest of it. As we have experiences, 3 other time selves develop, all past selves. The first is this is not in order, but they are the 3 are knowledge. We learn stuff. We learn how to do things. And yeah, they're pretty essential. We actually do loads of stuff with our memory that we don't even think about. When I tie my shoes in the morning, that's an act of memory. And I don't regard it as that, but of course it is. The second past self that gets created is narrative. So that's where I learn my name. I've been born someplace. I've been brought up in some religion, all this stuff. And the third is the psychological past, which is the one where the residue of experiences that you did not fully experience. And that's an important element I need to come on to. That to which you do not fully attend, shall weigh you down. And the psychological past is the home of those memories. Now, the narrative, as the psychological past develops more and more of these energies, so the narrative past then plays a more active role and goes beyond the name and so forth, and starts endorsing that experience as well. So if you're looking for a reason for something, you lash out, and then the narrative says, he deserved that because blah, blah, blah. So the narrative will support the psychological past. So where's the redemption? The redemption is in the most magnificent part of yourself, which is no space, no time, which I call the potential center. And that is the thing that watches and sees everything. It is, if you like, you want to call it the soul, the Atman, the Buddha, the Christ, whatever you want to call it. It isn't any of them, but it is something beyond our understanding, beyond our naming. And that is our true selves. And when we are born, the present and the potential are close. That's when the baby sees no difference in the world. As the past selves develop, then the potential becomes less to the fore. And indeed, many people forget they have that. And I suppose the fundamental point of time light is reminding everyone that they actually are an eternal soul. And that's fundamental. But how can it be that we're eternal souls and we don't know it? And we don't know it because of the energies of the past, which blind us to seeing that. We can't see it. And that's really, so it's not an act of amnesia. I don't forget anything my father did to me, but it has no power. It doesn't drive me.
So how do you get there, Bryan, though? Because when we talk about experiences that shape us in a way psychologically, how do you get to this point where these experiences don't have power over you anymore? Because I can speak from my own experiences, some that I had some experiences that deeply shaped me that were horrible at the time. And as I still hadn't processed them, in my head, I tell myself, "Oh, this doesn't have power over me. I am not defined by this." But it still had power over me.
Okay, so let's just deal with that for a moment. The experiences did not shape you. They created a self that has owned that problem, and it can be preeminent in your life. but it is not what you are.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's just not you. So that's the first thing to say. We just think it's shaped us because it's so overwhelming, as happened to me. The abuse was an overwhelming experience, which clearly did inform me and the way I lived my life, and furthermore, the way I saw the world. I saw the world as hostile, unloving, and furthermore, I myself could not be loved. That's an inevitable consequence, you'd think, of someone who's treated the way that I was, and indeed the way abused children are treated. It's hard to see it as a loving place if you're not loved. And that certainly is one thing, and it informs you to a very profound extent, but it is not you. Now, you say, but you said, I have tried hard to pull against that, but it works, but doesn't really. You can say all the happy thoughts and do all the positive what you like, but somehow doesn't quite do it. And the reason why it doesn't do it is you've got to understand where it comes from. The reason for your desire to say, I'm better than that, this is not going to affect me, comes from the thing itself.
Mhm.
Any desire you have to be happy must come from only one place: unhappiness. Happy people, or that aspect of you which is happy, which is your potential center, if you like, is eternally happy. It's joyful. It's in love with everything. But we don't see that. So therefore, an element of you, which is unhappy, you name it: angry, unhappy, jealous, envious, the whole deadly sin business, will create an energy that says, I don't want to be like that. But the energy comes from the thing itself. So when you say, I've tried to work on this and get better and all this, in the end, it's sort of almost like a doom loop, because while, yeah, you can improve, and as I say, whatever you do is great, it's hard to totally transform and change until you realize that's where that drive comes from. Now, I have a thing what I call the 20 golden keys. Now, the 20 golden keys is saying, look, these are all of the things that people will suffer and experience in their daily lives, which are, every human being has some of them, whether it is saying, I can't be loved, or I cannot love. And that is a very significant feature of it being loved. So that's one of them. And there's also things like how many people watching this block themselves or say, I'm just not good enough, or whatever it might be. Or maybe having an outsized angry response to a reasonable thing. I used to do that a lot as well. Someone said anything that contradicted anything I said, explosion. And so anyhow, there are 20 of them. And I said, here's the thing. You do one of 2 or 3 things with these 20 things. You deny they exist, or you say, it's just how it is. I was probably born that way, or my parents were like this, or you try and fix it. And I would suggest each of those 3 responses is wrong or not ideal. It's not wrong. I'm not ideal, but instead I'm saying, this is the golden key to understanding why you're like this. Don't run away from it. Don't try and fix it. Live with it. Be still with it. Watch it and learn those processes. And of course, with time, like you get all that. You learn those processes, and that's the way in. That's the way in. So rather than saying trying to fix something, you're just saying a moment ago, no, this is your opportunity. This is brilliant. You could actually now have this thing which you then follow through, and you unpack this, and you'll suddenly see why this is happening. And then you suddenly realize, my God, it wasn't me at all. I was being driven. I wasn't living through time at all. Time was living through me. I was a vehicle of psychological time. And when you understand that, for some people who get this, it's a revelation. And when I do podcasts, there are usually about 10 people who phone back and say, I get this. This is actually, it's changed me. I get this. And it's very few who do, but they're ready, but they do get that. So that's the revelation aspect. For most of us, it's about all the stuff I teach as well about changing the relationship, but with time, not the problem. So that's really what that's all about. So as I say, do you see that? Do you get that when you said I try and work on myself, but it works? Look where it comes from. It can only come from one place. It can only come from one place. If you can accept the idea that this self is owned by the problem, is created by the problem, who is there to fix it? There's no one there. It's the problem itself. Because the problem is trying to fix itself. And what it also does, because it is energetic, you'll start creating those same issues in your life. You'll see the patterns in your life and you'll repeat things that have happened before, whether it's money problems, relationship problems, job problems, whatever. And you'll keep on repeating them. And that's another aspect of the energy itself.
Yes.
That it will create a world and the people around it that sort of support that basic story.
Yes.
And with a view of saying, when are you going to fix this? When are you going to understand what's going on here? And I feel that ultimately that is the great drive of all humankind, is to understand. And I think that's true for your past as well. It wants to understand. And there are many, as I say, there are many techniques we can use. That is the fundamental point. And it's, it's quite revelatory because, as I say, we've all lived with this conceit, this fiction, that I'm this independent person, agent, who makes choices in life, which is, people take it as read. They don't think about that much. They just assume, here I am, an individual. I make decisions, sometimes bad, sometimes good. But that I'm still fundamentally this agent. And I say to people, well, that's great. So you chose then to live a life without love and being unable to love them, did you? And they said, no, not really. And so you must have, because you have chosen. You've just told me you're a free agent who makes decisions. So you've decided to that. He said, no, that's not right. I said, no, it's not right. It's you are being driven by this. It's not you driving.
Yes. And this is something, Bryan, you mentioned these narratives, these stories, right?
Yeah.
That are often rooted in the experiences, fear, social expectations. You talk a lot about this also in your latest book, The Untrue Story of You. And these narratives often feel so real to us, like what you just shared. When people say a free agent, then you point out, have you actually chosen that? And these narratives, they're not just psychological obstacles, but they're literally like prisons that keep us from living authentically and reaching our highest potential, which is what this podcast is actually all about.
Right.
Yeah, and you actually, what I really liked is that you not only assess these or explain this from a philosophical, from a spiritual point of view, you also offer a framework and tools to rewrite these stories. And just said, of course, there are some techniques. Could you maybe walk us through a technique or two or exercise from your book so people get an idea?
Okay, sure. I could go through loads of them, but let me just go back a bit and say, why on earth do you call a book The Untrue Story of You? Because ultimately, my story is untrue. It's not that the facts are correct, but the story is untrue. And every person's story is untrue. And the reason why it's untrue is because we haven't lived a 360-degree life. And we have seen everything subjectively, subject and object. And when we see that, we haven't seen the whole picture. Let me give you a bit of backstory to my father, who was deeply in love with his first wife, who hated him so much. He wasn't great with women, was he? Who hated him so much that she had an affair with another man and carried his baby. My father was so in love with her, he said, that doesn't matter. Come back and we'll raise this baby together. He already had 2 sons with her. So it was the third child, but he was not the father. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't stand you. And he, in the time, this was years ago in the 40s, I think, in those days, a woman could be a scarlet woman, was the expression, for having an affair whilst in marriage, right? And as a result of that, the courts ruled against her, and she was never allowed to see her children ever again. The problem was my father didn't really want the children either. And he tried to get them adopted. My two half brothers tried to get them adopted and failed. So in the end, he thought, oh my goodness, I need to marry again. There was my poor mother, who had been, as we discovered later, raised in an orphanage, who herself hardly had a blueprint for what love was or how to live a decent life. She didn't really know. But anyway, so she ends up marrying my father. And like the first wife, she grew to hate him. And after I was born, she turned around to him and said, we will never have sex again. And suddenly you realize that there's this man who actually really did not progress beyond the age of 5. He had the emotional age of the 5-year-old. So here he was, now in a sexless marriage. Whose fault was this? Mine. So therefore, I was the target of all his hatred. And yes, certainly he didn't speak to me for all those years, but when he did, it was a rage, it was a fury. I barely had a decent conversation with him until at least I was 16. So he is furious. And then suddenly I realized, oh, I understand where you're coming from. I was developing a 360-degree view of that. And that was a more complete story. And I wouldn't say I felt sorry for him, but I understood. And that was important too. That was part of my redemption as well. And also one of the things I learned was that one of the lessons is forgiveness. But the forgiveness is not about forgiving the other person. It's about forgiving yourself for carrying all that time with you. And saying, and the intention prayer ends with, and I dissolve you in my love. And that was quite an important thing to do. And you realize it doesn't matter almost, it's a weird thing to say with so much horror in the world, but everything comes from love, but is so often a perverted love.
Yes.
And it sounds a weird thing to help you say that with so much horror in the world, but it's like a perverted love. And that was,
I have published a few books, fiction books, and one of the central sentences in one from the female protagonist was, everything is about love, the presence or the absence of it. And I find that holds true. And it just resonated with me. It came up in my mind when you just mentioned this.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And so I think my father was doing the best he could and wasn't very good, was it? But it was the best he could do. And that was an important realization. And it's quite interesting, by the way. I'm not a great fan of left and right brain stuff. I think it's much more complex than that. But when they have done experiments with left brain, which is the narrator, the rational part of ourselves, and supposedly, yeah, it gets the story wrong in something like 70% of cases. But it will create a story that justifies itself and justifies our actions. And that's the narrator that would do that. So in a sense, that's why it became my untrue story. That to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. I did not fully attend. Mind you, I was 2. So I guess I could be forgiven for not fully attending. But that was important. So yeah, you talk about exercises, forgiveness is obviously one of them. Another one I do, which also helps with understanding 360-degree living, is I invite my people to say, okay, we're now going to tell the story from and most people have an issue with their mother or father. Actually, everyone does. 10,000 hands rise up. And I said, okay, you know what? But your parents were doing their best too. So here we go. The exercise is that you start telling your parents' story. right from the time before they were born, how the grandparents fell in love and had your mother and or father, and the great joy in their lives that this newborn was on the scene, and how your mother and father were so excited to go to school for the first time and wearing these new clothes never worn before, and the new satchel, and telling that story. And as they grow a bit older, the ambitions they had, the things they wanted to do with their lives. And then from there, how they met and how they fell in love. And they just thought, what a wonderful future, and hoping to get a home of their own. And then you came along.
Mm.
So what went wrong? And to understand that, you have to go back and write that story with that theme in mind. What do you think happened to your mother or your father that made them behave to you in the way that they did? And now it's an act of imagination. We can't necessarily, some people do know, but mostly it's an act of imagination. But that's fine. It's just as good, because everything's a fiction anyway. So create another one. That's okay.
Yeah.
But the exercise is not to relate the truth as you see it, but to just be bigger than that and suddenly realize, oh my God, they were just like me. They had their dreams and their hopes just as I had. And yet this all happened. And just see them as young people falling in love and just had so many hopes. And I think that's a cool exercise to do.
Yes.
It makes them more human, and hopefully makes you more understanding. And then that's one of the little exercises we do. There are stacks of them. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, sure. And I love this particular exercise because
Yeah.
what has also been so helpful for myself throughout the years is literally looking at, specifically with regard to my father, who is in his late 80s now. He's born in 1935, and how being born in Germany in 1935, how that impacted his young life when he was just a child, and how that informed him. And that has been really helpful for me, as well as in some states of meditation or deep connection with the self, as the self with a capital S, self. That's
Ariane, you froze on me for a long time there.
oh,
So
James, here a quick note. We'll have to edit that out. What was the last part you heard, Brian?
you were starting to speak to me, and then suddenly you froze completely. So,
Oh, okay. Do you remember what I said when I started to speak?
oh, really? You were responding to my exercise about your parents and imagining them as young people full of hope.
Okay, then I'll just start from the top again, James. And James, thank you, James. You can just stitch this together.
And
So
so,
I really love this exercise, Brian, and doing something akin to this exercise that you just shared with us really helped me also in understanding better, empathizing, and loving my own parents more. And also, it helped me rewrite my own narrative, because when you get what you talked about, this 360-degree view or more of it, you could really recontextualize, and you can let go of certain things that you projected on yourself. And yes, I would love for you to go on maybe with another technique, 'cause this one is a great one.
I've been following on from that one. Another one I call is 1,000 feet in the air.
Mhm.
And that is when there's you and you're also now looking down on a situation which was maybe a pivotal situation. It could have been saying you can't go to university, or you can't do ballet lessons, or you'll never be a painter, don't be ridiculous, or whatever it is. And you're 1,000 feet up, and down there are you and all the protagonists. But you have this enormous ability to understand everyone's position and why they're doing what they're doing. And just to be able to observe that for a few moments. We usually do it after meditation. And then again, it's just seeing things holistically and seeing them completely is quite a cool little exercise to do. On a practical level, we do a lot of no naming, no narrating. And so that is like mindfulness. People say, oh, it's mindfulness. I said, no, it's not mindfulness, because But mindfulness is 2,000 years old. It's developed by the Buddha. And what he was trying to say was, look, when you're drinking water, you don't drink water. You're drinking water, think, oh yeah, I've got to go to the dentist tomorrow. I really don't want to do that. You're not drinking water. You're at the dentist. And so that's mindfulness. It's when you're walking, walk. That's mindfulness. And it's great. What I'm saying is, no, let's do something different. We don't name, so we'll go as long as we possibly can and not name. And when you do start naming something, because we do, just go back to have a timeline meditation, go back to that, refresh, try it again. And the other thing is don't narrate. Now, it's amazing how much we narrate. We say all the time, we say, oh, no, I'm going to go down the road and I'm going to go and do this and that. And I just came out of a workshop and this woman said, I just can't believe I could function if I don't narrate. I said, really? She said, no. She said, yeah, I'm always saying about getting down the road and catching the bus and things. I said, yeah. So are you telling me that if you didn't narrate that, it wouldn't happen? But of course you would. You'd still walk down the road and you'd still catch your bus and you don't have to think it. It would still happen.
And I think it's also so important to get out of our heads. And as we are realizing now, we have our brain. A lot of people say the heart is actually also a type of brain. And then, of course, we have in our GI, also, it's we'll call it our gut instinct, a type of brain. For me personally, what you just said about narrating, oh gosh, yes. And that is so pervasive. And I can just speak from my own experience. I know that where I grew up in my home, intellect was highly prized, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, I think it led to me actually as a child, and I was always very emotional, very sensitive, empathetic, could sense people, read rooms. But it led to me really not allowing that to blossom as much as it has unfurled now in the latest years. I always so highly valued the intellect because I was, I was informed with. That was what I put the focus on. So this constant narration and thinking and overthinking, that's really, yes. So what do you advise to somebody who actually, yes, and I'm going to go take the bus and I'm going to make my appointment? Because of course, if you try to not think of the pink elephant, you'll think of the pink elephant. If you try to think of thinking, you will kind of,
You're not trying to block anything.
No.
It's just being aware that you are. These processes are happening. Now, the reason why this narrating exercise is good is it goes back because it fuels the narrator. And the narrator, if you remember, supports the psychological past. So they play a role together. One justifies, the other just is, has this energy. And when you don't narrate, you disempower it to an extent. Suddenly, your narration is weakening because it's all part of that. If I'm walking down the street, that's an aspect of my narration which gives it strength. So if I become aware of it, then that's something that really can change its energy. And over time, but it does work. And you said people say, oh, don't think. Every Indian guru, you say, don't think. You do think. That's it. It does. It's not that you try to not think. It is seeing the processes. You talk about exercises. We have the 5 energy centers: present, past psychological, past knowledge, past narrative, and potential. And we are so complex that they can all be firing almost at the same time. So one game we play is saying, guess where this comes from. And for example, if for example, you go out one day and you get bitten by a crazy dog, you can either, if you keep that in present, you understand he's a crazy dog because his owner is so cruel and nasty to him. And I will certainly make sure I will never go near that dog ever again. And that's a simple memory, which is a self-preservation memory. And that's fine. If we didn't have that, we'd get bitten by a dog every day, right? So that is an important memory that we say, to protect my body, to protect myself, I need to have these simple memories. The problem comes when that memory gets extended in time. the psychological past. Now that starts to think the world is not safe. It's a dangerous place. I'm frightened of all dogs. I must not go out so much. Which again, you say, well, that's rational, but it's not, it's irrational. But so any simple desire extended in time becomes the psychological past. So we have the basic needs, as every human being does, for shelter, for food, for sex, so on. We all know what our bodily needs are. And we're fine, that's what we need in order to survive and what have you. The problem comes when all those basic needs can become extended in time. So then the desire for a house gets extended in time as a need for a mansion, because it comes from great unhappiness. And there's nothing wrong living in a mansion if you know what you're doing, great. But if you think that it's going to compensate for your unhappiness, you're going to be very disappointed. But because that is an extension in time. Similarly, sex can get extended in time as pornography. The need for food could extend it back in time, so you become a gourmand, someone who just has to eat amazing food all the time, whatever. And again, there's nothing wrong in any of this as long as you know what's happening.
Right.
So that is extension in time, and that's what the psychological past is. It creates, then you see, it creates that idea of psychological time. Why? Because you were not fully present in that moment when it happens. When a dog bit you, a dog bit you. It doesn't mean the world is hostile. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go out. It doesn't mean that all dogs are like that. But we think that. And so all of these things come into play because of this initial experience that we did not fully attend to.
And when you talk
Sorry?
about this, Bryan, about not fully attending, do you mean by this, let's say a dog bites us, or we experience violence from our caretakers? Do you mean by we don't fully attend it that we disassociate in that moment? Or
I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing to do in the moment, and most people can't, but we can do it retrospectively, which is what all timeline is about. No, if you're being beaten by an adult or sexually abused by an adult, and tragically this happens too often, it's very hard to say to that person, you need to fully attend and realize all the players and the implications and the reasons why. That's a pretty hard ask. But you can do it afterwards, and we can learn this because it's vital that we do. Even if you don't believe in the spiritual model. I don't know if you're aware of the adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
Okay. In 1997, Kaiser Permanent researchers put together 18 of them and did some research on the basis of that. Yeah, and they ranged from simple things like my parents would at home when I came back from school. My parents were always rowing. My father was an alcoholic, all the way through, right through to sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And they discovered that people who suffered six or more adverse childhood experiences, compared to someone who suffered none, is likely to die 20 years earlier. 430, you are touting all the figures out. 439,000 people die each year in the United States as a direct result of adverse childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. Fact. It's now considered one of the major causes of premature death. It's also one of the major drivers for chronic disease, from heart disease, cancers, arthritis, etc. So if some of you people haven't really got what I'm saying just yet, think about that, because how can that possibly be? How can it possibly be that a father who shouted at me when I was 5 actually increases my risk of dying 20 years prematurely? How could that happen? Similarly, traumatized people have different shaped brains. The amygdala and other areas of the brain are subtly different from a healthy person. How can that be? Go back to the basic premise of timeline. Time is energy created at the moment of trauma. Only energy can do these things.
Yes.
Only energy can drive you to an early grave. Only energy can shape your brain differently. And it has biochemical effects too. They do recognize this. Most people have all sorts of different issues, different chemicals running through their blood and God knows what else. So that, and they say, and they just say, like, that's it, we understand that. But they haven't understood it at all, because they haven't said, why does that happen? And it happens because time is energy. And when you get that, and you say, so then you say, not only does it put me into an early grave, it also changes who I am. It creates who I am. It creates a self that has had that experience and continues to have that experience. Bessel van der Kolk or something.
Yes, Bessel van der Kolk. The body keeps the score. Yeah.
In that book, he says that whether the trauma happened 40 years ago or yesterday, my patients cannot tell the difference.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why, and as you just pointed out, Bryan, link between these adverse childhood experiences and the adult health outcomes, it's absolutely incredible, whether it's the psychological health, the mental health, the physical health. And that's what also is so phenomenal about your approach and timeline. It adds a completely new dimension by not only acknowledging these impacts, but by offering a structured way to heal from them. And if we think about, as I'm sure our parents did the best they could with at that particular moment in time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was just not so great or even horrific. And that's also why it's so important to heal, to become the versions of ourselves that are not driven by this time heaviness, so to speak, because these things get passed down. And unless we become conscious of them and become the cycle breakers, they will just keep getting passed down, and we'll call it normal. Just how in some places I just read about, the horrific murder, because it is murder, of an Olympic athlete who got burnt by her significant quote other over a dispute. And then now, of course, they're showing all these other incidents. The particular lady, she lived in Kenya, but they brought up other examples. And these athletes are people who are famous, who are valued even differently in their society. So if it can happen to them, what does that mean for other women? Another woman, the story, and it just popped into my mind, she died from impact injuries because she was beaten so badly. She screamed throughout the entire night. Nobody in her neighborhood did anything because that was normal for them, that people would have violent disputes, right? So when we operate from something is normal, and then we don't change anything about it, that it'll just go on. It'll get passed on.
Yeah, and you just touched on a very important point as well, because we think that it all starts from our birth, and it really doesn't. We don't come into this world as innocent beings. We come in bringing these energies with us too.
Yeah.
So it's not just the energies that then get created. As with children, it's energies that we also have, and we represent energies, such as you see it through the generations, whether it's gambling, alcoholism, whatever it is. The grandfather, the great-grandfather, whatever, had this too. And I just think it's just our responsibility to end this. It's every human being's responsibility to end that pattern and to talk about pay it forward. When you change, the world changes. It really does, because you get back to the point that there is only subject. The object goes. And so if I've changed, everything has just changed. And the energy has changed. And you don't have to fix somebody else. You fix yourself, because it's the only thing in the room. And when that does change, these profound changes do happen. Can I just touch on one on it? Because we're probably running a bit out of time here. But can I just to touch on one important thing? Because it's really important right now in the world with Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan. No one talks about Sudan. 5 million people have died in Sudan in the war. And I just want to talk about the home of war and conflict because it is important. And it is where we were talking about earlier. It is the marriage of narrative and psychological past. It is the place where my story, my hurts, my people's hurts mix with the psychological past. And it's not a trivial thing to say, but probably people think it is, that all conflict and every war is an act of memory. And I'm sure you travel around the world a lot. We do. When you just look at another human being in the eyes, it doesn't matter if they're Jew, or Arab, or Muslim, or Christian, or whatever they are. All I see in front of me is a human being with whom I'm drinking tea or whatever. And that's the truth, isn't it? That's actually true. That is, I see in your eyes me, and I see your humanity, and I see your divine nature. I see that. There's a tribe in Africa that actually does that. I don't know if you've heard about this. When they meet for the first time, they just hold each other and just stare into each other's eyes. And only when they say, I see you, has the exchange completed. But that's really what is. But we lose that in war and conflict because it is the memory, and we are removed from that delicious present moment of being. And instead, we're driven by memory and by the psychological and the narrative pasts. And that is war. And you know, the awful thing to say, and people gasp when I say, is you know why there's war all the time, apart from the fact it's memory, is that because you like it. And you like it because it's a vindication of the narrative self. And when you do something and your narrative self endorses it, explains it, justifies it, that's what's happening. And so we have to really wake up to that and understand that deep truth. And I just wanted to throw that in. It's slightly off subject, but because we are so surrounded by conflict at the moment, it was just something I wanted to mention as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that, Bryan. I actually recently had the pleasure, the episode is not published yet. I spoke to a phenomenal woman. Her name is Rebecca Deng. She is a survivor and also a thriver of the Second Sudanese War. She wrote a phenomenal book. And she also touched upon some of the things you mentioned, and these narratives, the memories, and forgiveness and compassion, such as you also focus on, have also been big focus of hers to share. And it's so important we talk about these things, the awareness alone, and then to not go into the narrative.
Yeah.
But to heal, and as you mentioned before, the healing of self. That is our first responsibility. From that, everything else emanates.
It does.
And Bryan, I'm so grateful you shared your experience with us, your knowledge and your wisdom. I know there will be plenty of people in the audience who want to do a deeper dive and learn more. They can, of course, read your books. For those who would like to reach you and maybe also connect with some of your offerings, where can they find you?
Sure, well, it is the website. So that's timelight.co.uk, and there's a hyphen between time and light. So time-light.co.uk. There's also a book I wrote called The Untrue Story of You, which is available still on Amazon or wherever. I even found it on a bookshelf once. I thought, wow, that's great. But it certainly is available on Amazon. And yeah, the teaching has moved on a little bit from that point, but it's still pretty good stuff and still very helpful, I think, for people. Yeah. And on the website, it's a bundle of wit and wisdom, I must say. It's a lot of free stuff on there, but there's also some courses you can take. And I did a 2-part course, and that's available to buy if you want to dig a bit deeper. But the important thing is just stay in touch with me and join the mailing list and what have you, and we'll tell you more stuff. And as I do a quick call out as well, if I may say, one other avenue I'm starting to pursue, which is I really feel that it's nice to talk to crowds and people, and that's fine. But I really think that the good work is going to be done on one-to-one. And to that end, I'm now looking for people who'd like to become time-light therapists, because I'd like to teach them and train them. And whether they are life coaches or therapists already or whatever, and they're interested in what I've been saying, or maybe at least explore more, I'd like to be able to do that. And it's for me a next big step for me to do that and to offer that to people. I think that's where the real work can be done. And yeah, so that's something I'd like to pursue. So I hope that's okay if I mention that.
Absolutely, Bryan. And this is something that I personally also find of interest. I haven't really talked about it on this podcast, but I've had the incredible honor of being a mentor and also a coach to wonderful human beings over the last 2 decades. So what you just said is of personal interest to me, and I'd love to explore and learn more.
That's fantastic. So first recruit. There you I couldn't imagine a better recruit. That'd be outstanding. Yeah. But thank you. Yeah.
You are most kind, Bryan, and I will make sure to put everything you mentioned in the show notes for easy access for our audience. Again, so much gratitude to you, and also
Thank you.
enormous regards to your beautiful wife, Lynn McTaggart, who was also a guest on this podcast. You are a phenomenal couple doing so much good in this world, and I'm just so grateful to you and also to Lynn.
Bless you. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to a super smart woman like my wife, and who's doing great spiritual work as well. So we keep on, right?
See.
Thank you.
Thank you.